Is it actually possible that Nancy Guthrie's kidnapper had to pivot right in the heat of the moment? Well, the physical proof suggests exactly that. This was a calculated move until an unexpected complication indoors triggered a desperate, last-minute backup strategy. We aren't debating if things went off script. Those crimson stains confirm the shift. The real mystery lies in what sparked the chaos. You'll see why in just a moment. A particularly haunting snapshot from this probe features the bloodied floor of Nancy Guthrie's entryway. The Pima County Sheriff's Office verified those spatters belonged to her, turning that visual into the investigation's focal point. Yet, the true weight of that photo isn't merely the presence of gore, which is something many news reports have overlooked. It's the glaring absence elsewhere. It's missing from the kitchen and nowhere to be found in the bedroom. The main living spaces were completely untouched. An insider informed Brian Enton of News Nation that Nancy's place looked spotless inside, showing zero evidence of a struggle. The majority of the house was noted for being incredibly tidy. That same investigator confirmed that the residence showed no hallmarks of a violent encounter. Specifically, it was reported that parts of the home were essentially flawless. Nearly 8 weeks into the search, Ashley Banfield consulted Phil Waters, a veteran Houston murder investigator with over 400 cases under his belt, who shared that same assessment. Zero biological evidence surfaced in the bedrooms or the common areas. The carnage wasn't scattered across the floor plan. Everything starts right at the threshold of the main door. On her podcast, Drop Dead Serious, reporter Ashley Banfield cited 2 distinct police contacts, noting that the stains weren't confined to the exterior. The interior was marked as well. Right behind the doorway, identical spatter marks mirrored the ones found on the steps, stretching from the hall directly out to the porch. It is a seamless trail of evidence connecting the foyer to the outdoors. Actually, new info this week pinpoints the location exactly at the main entrance's ledge. While the Pima County Sheriff hasn't verified these leaks, Banfield stood firm on the credibility of her reporting. A pair of police insiders backed each other up, though one provided even deeper details. When the second contact revealed what triggered the call to major crimes detectives, it wasn't the mess on the porch that did it. The entryway itself was the red flag. Essentially, the entire residence was pristine aside from one isolated spot. The trail originates in just one area, marks both sides of the door casing, and spills out toward the exterior. This wasn't a fight that moved through different areas, nor a path through the hallways. It happened strictly at the entrance. Things weren't meant to stop there, and figuring out why the timeline broke is exactly what we are going to dissect in this breakdown. The way the house was staged reveals the original strategy before the wheels fell off. During Savannah Guthrie's initial sit-down on the Today Show, broadcast on March 26, 2026 with Hoda Kotb, she mentioned the rear exits were discovered standing wide open. She mentioned that twice during separate parts of that interview. Her family's first thought during those chaotic early moments was that paramedics had entered through the back. To them, that was the only logical explanation. But NY's phone was still inside. Her handbag was there too. Her shoes were there. She had been taken in her pajamas, totally barefoot. No ambulance ever came. The back doors were open because someone intentionally set them that way, like the paramedics arrived because the back doors were wedged open. And Banfield's police sources provide the specific detail that turned Savannah's odd find into a calculated tactic. On the March 31st episode of Drop Dead Serious, Banfield stated that several law enforcement sources told her the kidnapper used NY's own patio planters to hold those doors open. The rear kitchen entry has 2 parts, an exterior screen door and a heavy inner door. Both were found wedged open. The back fence gate was also held open with those same pots. I have had 2 additional police sources since then confirm the back door was wide open. He grabbed her lovely flower pots and used them to prop that screen door. 3 distinct entry points held open simultaneously. Banfield also mentioned a high-level source, who said several outdoor security cameras and lights were destroyed before the kidnapping occurred. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has not officially confirmed these particular details. Consider them with caution. But the scene they describe, with disabled cameras, cut exterior lighting, and 3 simultaneous entry points staged, isn't how an amateur behaves. You don't break cameras you haven't already scouted. You don't pick out specific items from the yard to hold doors open unless you have already scouted those doors and made a plan. And you definitely don't do any of this the very first night you arrive. The FBI's own investigative steps support this theory. Detectives requested security footage from a neighbor for 2 specific dates, January 11th and January 24th. Both dates are weeks before the abduction on February 1st. Authorities haven't publicly said what they were looking for, but you don't request video from 2 specific days unless you believe something significant happened near that house then. The request itself suggests the FBI is working with a theory that the suspect was near NY's home at least twice before she went missing. Sheriff Chris Nanos has stated on the record that investigators believe the kidnapping was targeted. He has confirmed that they believe they have identified the motive. He has refused to share that motive publicly, citing the active investigation. Targeted, pre-planned, scouted in advance, 3 entries staged, cameras dead. The back was the exit. That was the script. Yet the blood is at the front. Now, here's the part of this case that most sleuths haven't looked into deeply enough. Because if you accept that this hit was as calculated as the evidence suggests, then you must ask a tougher question than just if the route changed. One must wonder about the specific nature of this scheme, the requirements for its success, and which single pillar, if pulled, would cause the whole thing to crumble. A calculated abduction for cash, which is the prevailing theory among investigators, relies on one absolute, non-negotiable factor: staying anonymous. The perpetrator must remain a complete stranger to the victim, impossible to pick out of a lineup, and incapable of being linked to an identity, since the payout process, the talks, and the safety verification all hinge on the captor's identity remaining hidden. Once that secrecy vanishes, the whole structural integrity of the mission fails. The priority shifts instantly from completing the task to managing a disaster. The person of interest clearly grasped how vital it was to stay out of sight. Clips shared by the Bureau on February 10th depict him at the main entrance of the residence after dark, behaving with cold calculation, tampering with the smart doorbell while hiding behind the porch plants to keep his face off the recording. His face was covered and his hands were shielded. Wearing a coat and trousers, he carried a 25-liter Ozark trail bag with a sidearm clearly in view. Every detail of that frame, the disguise, the hand covers, and the way he ducked the lens, points toward a desperate need for secrecy. Yet, one major puzzle piece from that footage remains a public mystery. He stayed covered for the outside security. The disguise remained as he moved through the dark bedroom to confront Nancy Guthrie. Her actual perspective remains unknown. This detail is crucial because a mission designed to keep the actor hidden, carried out by a person cautious enough to tamper with the outdoor lenses prior to entry and stay hidden even from a device he planned to break, shows a high level of tactical preparation. Choosing the rear door, far from the road, avoiding the front-facing tech, and slipping through a side entrance into the shadows perfectly matches a strategy where staying unseen was the top priority. Using the rear wasn't just practical, it was about staying in the dark. He meant to lead her out that way, ducking all potential witnesses, and vanish. Then, he finally made contact with Nancy. During a broadcast, Savannah Guthrie detailed her mother's health with such precision that it changed how we view the whole event. She noted that her mother lived with intense physical suffering. Her spine was in terrible shape. Fetch the mail was a victory on rare days, but usually impossible. A fact that complicates the rear escape plan. Moving through the galley, over the rear deck and past a fence, over uneven ground in the dark without shoes, would be a brutal task for someone so frail. Ashley Banfield tackled this head-on during her show, posing a blunt inquiry. Was the intent to force Nancy out that rear entrance at gunpoint, through the open door? And furthermore, did he grasp that she was physically incapable of that trek? She speculated, perhaps the assailant failed to realize that Mrs. Guthrie couldn't handle the distance he had mapped out. This forces an immediate audible, which is the core of the movement theory. It's a grounded perspective backed by solid facts. Someone who struggled to walk to the curb wasn't going to manage a trek across a dark yard while terrified and in agony. Issues with physical movement might account for the shift in strategy. However, the mobility theory fails to explain one major detail. It offers no insight into what occurred at the doorway. Professor Peter Valentin, who leads the forensics department at New Haven University, a veteran expert in blood spatter patterns with testimony across 7 states and federal jurisdictions, weighed in on Banfield's show nearly 52 days into the case to examine the entryway blood trail. He identified these specific marks as skeletonized spots. That technical classification carries a very specific weight. These stains occur when blood hits the floor and starts hardening before being smeared or moved. The edges dry first, leaving an empty-looking middle. This isn't the kind of mark left by someone just rushing through a door. This blood had time to sit and settle. Right, so I am looking at what we call skeletonized drops here. If you check out the splatter patterns found on the exterior of the home, they have already started to set. The blood hit the ground and started to crust over before whoever was bleeding actually moved on. Valentin noted these patterns existed on both the interior and exterior of the doorway. According to his findings, finding blood on both sides of that line suggests a very specific conclusion about the timeline. We are talking about a meaningful window of time here. It was not just a split-second encounter. Nancy remained at that entrance long enough for blood to pool on both the porch and the foyer. Simple physical struggle does not explain a stall at the door like this. If they just switched exits because the back way was blocked and just carried her out the front, the forensic trail would not look this way. You would see a quick transit, one clean pass as they moved her out. Instead, we see blood settling heavily on either side of one door frame for what an expert calls a substantial amount of time. Something went down right there at the entrance. It was not over in a heartbeat. There was a delay that kept Nancy trapped at that door before she was eventually moved across the deck. Why would someone be pinned at a doorway, stuck there, instead of being moved through smoothly for that length of time? Long enough for blood to start drying on both sides of the wood? A fight, a standoff, or some kind of exchange that broke the flow of the kidnapping. Some factor caused a significant hesitation. A stall long enough for those droplets to begin hardening exactly how Dr. Valentin detailed. In a pre-planned abduction designed for total secrecy, the one thing that ruins everything is the victim knowing the attacker. We need to be clear about what being recognized implies in this scenario. We are not talking about some random intruder at a lucky house. Police have officially stated this was a calculated hit, and Nancy Guthrie was the specific mark. The house was scouted, and every security camera was located and cut. Every path was mapped out, and local items were repurposed as equipment. That kind of tactical prep is not the result of just driving by once. It stems from familiarity. If that feeling was mutual, if Nancy actually knew the invader in her home, is a mystery the public files cannot solve. However, the implications of her recognition are what the evidence points to directly. A kidnapping for cash relies on the abductor being a stranger to the captive. This isn't because people behave better when they don't know their captor. They don't. It's because the whole plan relies on the target being unable to name their attacker. Proof-of-life calls, money drops, and bargaining all assume the culprit is a shadow. Once the person taken can attach a name or a specific look to the guy who snatched them, the entire strategy pivots. The danger of letting them go, the whole point of the job, changes completely. Think about how the math looks from inside the plot once someone is spotted. You have prepped a site. You have scouted it over several visits. You have cut the feeds and set the exits. The plan assumes that when it ends, when the cash is paid or the goal is hit, the person cannot turn you in. That is the foundation. Without it, the whole operation changes completely. A snatching where the target knows the kidnapper isn't a clean job. It becomes much more dangerous for the person pulling the trigger. It adds a wild card that cameras and exit routes cannot fix. It adds a person with a face and a story linked to you. And there is only one way to erase that risk. That is what it means to say he scrapped his plan once she saw him, not simple logistics. It was a total shift in the threat level for everything that followed. The scene at the door supports both ideas and may show them happening at once. Amy Santoro, an 18-year forensics vet and blood pattern expert in field and lab work, joined the March 17, 2026 Megyn Kelly show on SiriusXM for a deep dive into the bloodstains seen in the public photos and clips of Guthrie's house. She made it clear she has no career, linked to the case, and worked strictly from open-source materials. Her take is a recorded expert view, not a police find or part of the case. She called the porch stains drips, fluid falling by weight from a live wound onto the ground below. She said the marks showed blood dropping from at least 2 feet up, though she could not name the specific body part. What she could confirm was the speed. There is so much blood that if you were on the move, I do not think you would see those patterns with a slow leak. I think it proves she was bleeding out fast. It shows a heavy flow. High volume, or what pros call secondary splashing. Patterns like this usually occur when blood drops from a particular elevation onto a flat surface. Based on the evidence, the fluid likely fell from a distance of at least 2 feet. Analyzing the total volume is crucial for interpreting the entryway findings. A slow, minor leak wouldn't create the kind of spray Santoro identified in those porch photos. However, a deep, fast bleeding laceration definitely would. Furthermore, a wound that bleeds heavily while a person is being moved through the air creates the upright splatter both Santoro and O'Connell noted. The sheer quantity of blood indicates Nancy suffered an injury before she even reached the veranda. The distribution suggests she wasn't walking on her own when it happened. She also clarified which specific causes the evidence effectively rules out. In her view, the staining doesn't match the results of a shooting. She looked for the signature fine misting and grouping of high-impact wounds, but found nothing. She claimed the marks don't resemble the kind of massive trauma one sees from a firearm. She proposed a few potential origins without settling on just one. A simple dermal rupture, a heavy blow to the face, or even a simple nosebleed. She explained that because senior skin is so delicate, even a moderate hit could cause significant bleeding. Santoro also made a comment that has been widely misconstrued in various reports. Using only public video clips and lacking access to any internal scene photographs, she mentioned that she didn't see any obvious blood near the doorway. Judging solely from the footage available to the general public, the trauma seemed to occur outside the home, though she immediately added a caveat. We simply don't have information on the state of the home's interior. That gap in knowledge is where Banfield's inside sources and Dr. Valentine's analysis come into play. Santoro never actually dismissed the possibility of blood being inside the house. She was merely pointing out what the public footage failed to show. What the expert reviews and source data provide are details the cameras didn't catch. Dried blood rings on both sides of the door suggest a heavy and prolonged presence at the entry. Medical examiner Dr. Michael Ben analyzed the digital crime scene photos for Fox News and provided a more detailed look at the injuries. He stated that Nancy Guthrie was bleeding from either her face or her hands. He focused his analysis on the physical shape of the drops. He noted that blood spots featuring pale centers or a donut-like appearance are common when fluid comes from the mouth or nose as it mixes with oxygen. He added that these weren't random drips, noting the high count and specific layout. Given where they were found on the deck outside the residence, they strongly suggest a struggle occurred during an actual kidnapping. Bowden conducted his review using photographs rather than visiting the scene in person. Linking those hollow-centered drops to facial injuries is a logical forensic deduction. It is the most frequent explanation for that particular staining style. This doesn't serve as a final medical verdict on what Nancy endured. Essentially, Santoro and Bowden are in complete agreement on this point. The injury most likely affected the face or upper torso rather than being a fatal gunshot. It was a fast bleeding wound located very close to the head, the type of trauma you'd see from a punch, a fall, or a collision. Maybe a violent hand-to-hand struggle at arm's length. Former Fed Maureen O'Connell sat down with Brian Enton on News Nation on March 8th, digging into the blood splatter to see what was missing. She didn't spot a single interruption. In the world of forensics, a void is just a gap where something blocked the blood before it hit the floor. Usually, someone walking through a scene leaves a steady trail of footsteps in the mess. But O'Connell noted that those expected footprints weren't on the front porch at all. According to her, I'm skeptical she walked out on her own because the patterns were unbroken. You'd expect a foot or something else to cut through that trail. There just aren't any clear breaks in the blood. To me, it looks like she's bundled up in something while they're hauling her away. She noted the drops were perfectly circular and stayed whole as they fell. They dropped straight down without any momentum, like blood dripping from a fixed height. The trail was a steady, vertical line, lacking the stretched-out look you'd see if someone were moving fast. It looks like a controlled carry. She also spotted what seemed like misting in the pattern, the kind of spray you get from someone coughing or breathing blood, suggesting Nancy was likely breathing when she was removed from the house, even if she was blacked out by then. She told Brian Enton flat out, "I don't think she left on her own 2 feet. I'm convinced 2 people were carrying her body." Retired Fed Jim Clemente backed up the main point about the vertical drops, confirming there was no forward speed, even if he had a slightly different take on the wrapping. He argued that if Nancy was wrapped up while being moved, it wasn't a tight job because the blood was still leaking out of the covering. Still, that minor debate doesn't change the big picture. She wasn't walking. They were transporting her. Her feet never touched the ground often enough to break the blood trail. The blood was just dripping from her while she was being held up and moved. Now, combine Valentine's doorway analysis with O'Connell's theory of her being carried. Valentine pointed out she was stuck at that doorway for more than just a second, long enough for the blood drops to start drying around the edges on both sides of the frame. O'Connell adds that by the time she hit the porch, she was being hauled away, not moving herself. That timeline paints a very specific picture of the night. Whatever went down at that doorway didn't happen in a flash. Something held Nancy in that exact spot for a significant amount of time, giving the blood a chance to set on both sides before they dragged her through and across the porch. In this case, the doorway is more than just a way out. It's where the main event happened. Here is the play-by-play that the verified evidence actually points to. This isn't the story the cops are telling. They haven't gone public with their side yet. This is what the physical proof, the experts, and the inside sources tell us. The whole place had been set up beforehand. He cut the lights and killed the cameras. The back entrance was left wide open. The killer showed up at the front door, fully prepared, wearing a mask and gloves, with a 25-liter pack on his back and a pistol at his hip. He messed with the ring camera first, using the bushes to hide from the lens before cutting it off. FBI footage from February 10, 2026, shows him doing exactly that. He was methodical and calm. This clearly wasn't the first time he'd stepped foot inside that house. The events that followed left 0 physical clues inside. The bedroom's untouched. So was the kitchen. Common rooms are clear. One investigator actually described the residence as spotless. However the struggle played out, it wasn't a long fight throughout her home. The blood trail doesn't start there. That void is just as telling as the proof itself. An intruder entered with a goal and found Nancy, yet the path from the rear to the front is blank. Hallways show nothing, meaning whatever occurred was localized and finished in that one spot. It never spread across other rooms. The violence didn't migrate from one area to another. The pristine interior, plus the blood-soaked entrance, suggest a very specific, contained encounter. Then we hit the front entrance. Everything starts at that door. Perhaps Nancy headed there after waking up to a noise, some gut instinct pulling her toward the main exit, or she was dragged there. Forensics can't say. What we do know is that she was at that doorway long enough to leave the dried stains Dr. Valentine mentioned. Not briefly, not just passing, but staying. She was then carried over the porch, leaving a trail experts say came from severe head wounds while being held high. She wasn't walking, multiple people were hauling her. Per the shared findings of every former federal agent studying the case, Harry Tritus told Yahoo News, subduing anyone, even an 84-year-old woman in poor health, is an incredible amount for one person to manage. So I truly feel at least 2 people were involved. Raymond Carr told News Nation that moving Nancy solo through the dark over rough terrain would be too much for one person. Moore and Wannell told Brian Anton directly, "I believe 2 people carried her. The back gate, screen door, and kitchen entrance were all left open. 3 preset exits were available, yet they chose none of them." Ex-agent Andrew Bringwell told Newsweek the goal was to kidnap her, but things went south. Violence broke out. She was hurt, but still breathing. Things fell apart. The strategy didn't go as planned. That blood at the front door is the physical evidence of the breakdown. The question this video title leads to involves such an intricate plan. The scouting trips throughout early and mid-January, the cameras located and destroyed, the lights cut, the back exit prepped with items from the yard, and the culprits staying fully masked. This scheme required one thing to work: The victim must not identify who snatched her in this ransom plot. That wasn't a minor detail. It was the core foundation. Everything after the grab, from proof of life to ransom notes, and the possible return, assumes the attacker is a stranger. It assumes she can't look back and name a face. That individual is identifiable. He hid from the outer lens before killing the power to that feed. Once inside those pitch-black walls during that sudden face-to-face, Nancy's perspective remains a mystery. We cannot confirm if he was still wearing that disguise. It is unclear if a familiar voice, a certain build, or a specific stride gave him away. Detectives are convinced she was singled out, suggesting this abduction was a calculated, personal hunt. Furthermore, hunting a specific individual implies a pre-existing link, whether close or distant, making it highly likely that both parties knew exactly who they were looking at. If she recognized her captor, the original strategy didn't just face a minor setback. The entire mission shattered at its most vital stage. That elaborate escape through the rear of the property was instantly abandoned. The new goal was dragging her out immediately to stop her from fighting or screaming for help. The main entrance was the quickest path. They bolted through the front, and during that crucial pause at the entryway mentioned by Dr. Valentine, a struggle occurred that stained the doorframe red before she was hauled into the night. Former federal investigator Raymond Carr, who views the back as an entry point rather than a getaway route, agrees on the front exit. I am absolutely certain the main door was their final point of departure. While specialists might debate the purpose of the rear access, the forensic blood trail at the porch is undeniable. She was hurried out there, wounded. The public trail ends right here, leaving us with a haunting, unanswered mystery. Did he scrap his plan because she saw his face? That remains a theory, not a fact, because the details of what Nancy witnessed late that night on January 31st, 2026, who she identified or what words were exchanged, remains the one piece of the puzzle that the current case files cannot yet resolve. The authorities hold those secrets close, refusing to divulge any further details, though the physical clues certainly support this version of events. This was a surgical grab that relied entirely on the kidnapper remaining a shadow. Every detail was meticulously crafted to ensure he stayed invisible from the street. From the surveillance angles to the lighting, the masked approach, and the decoy rear exit were all part of the act. He covered his face for the porch cam right before disconnecting it entirely. Inside, the residence remained untouched, except for that single, bloody area by the front door. That threshold held the blood long enough to start drying before she was finally moved. They chose the front, ignoring the staged back way, and the garden gate held open by her own plants. The front became the exit by necessity, simply because it was the nearest escape once the wheels fell off. All of this points to a messy human encounter where the secrecy of the operation collapsed. The evidence proves this confrontation lasted much longer than a mere second. A violent struggle unfolded at an entrance that was never supposed to be used. Savannah Guthrie made a public plea, begging for someone to finally come forward. She described her family's current state as absolute heartbreak. During the quiet, dark hours of the morning, she is haunted by the unthinkable terror her mother must have endured. A reward of $1 million is being offered for any tip leading to Nancy's return. A separate $100,000 bounty is now available from federal agents for her return or for convicting those responsible. As the investigation stands today, the truth feels closer than ever, yet still just out of reach. Every hidden detail uncovered has only deepened the mystery, raising questions no one can easily answer. What once seemed like a closed story is now unraveling into something far more complex and unsettling. The silence, the missing pieces, the moments that don't quite add up, they all point to something bigger waiting to be revealed. And as the search continues, one thing is certain: this case is far from over, and the most shocking discovery may still be ahead. Got any useful info? Regarding that window in the Catalina foothills outside Tucson from January 31st into February 1st, 2026. Call 1-800-CALL-FBI or file a report at tips.fbi.gov. If your view of that night Nancy vanished has shifted, please speak up. Share your breakdown below, avoiding baseless rumors. Stick to rigorous logic. This case deserves that scrutiny.